right, welcome back to the Last Choice TV Reviews, The Winchesters. My name is James III. I am finally, thankfully, I'm so excited that you're back. I am Ender TV. Ender, welcome back.
I am back.
Thank
you
goodness.
Didn't do a terrible job while I was gone.
I mean, anyone that watches probably like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about.
Well, I mean, but here's the thing is this show has not required you to know the lore of Supernatural to understand the show. They have given you everything you need to know. And anything that would be outside of it would just be Easter eggs that anyone has dropped in there or things like that from that point. So it hasn't been required. They've also changed the history. So we've got a very different origin story and meeting story between Mary and John as we've already moved through the starting of this. So things are different. And I like that.
I do want to get your opinion in there because I brought this up on a few of the other episodes where people have clearly been talking about that the history has changed. Some other people like Kia from Parents vs. Gaming, it's like, I'm not really sure if I'll like it because I'm a big Supernatural fan and I've heard that they've changed the history. But does it seem like they did it the right way by using it's Dean, right? That's narrating the story.
Yeah, so
it's like he found some lost journals and it's almost like he's telling you the true story and he's openly telling you in the narration it's going to be different than what you thought you knew.
Well, no, so I think in order to make the story interesting for John's character, John has to be a hunter. There's no show. So that's the whole thing. John doesn't become a hunter until after the incident with Mary and Supernatural. So like he's not hunting with Mary. Mary and him meet and they go off and she stops hunting. And that's this whole like thought process here where you continue to, and I even think in this episode, or especially the last episode, where Mary's struggling with whether or not she's going to continue hunting after she finds her dad. So like they're setting this up, this spot up where Mary's no longer hunting, her and John settled down and they have kids. Like at some point you're going to have Sam and Dean. But there's also the thought process out there that in Supernatural, there is two parallel worlds that you learn about way into the series. And in one parallel world, Sam and Dean don't exist. They never were born because supposedly, and Mary and John were hunting and John dies in that aspect of it. So I don't know if that's a spoiler here or not, but a lot of people are saying, hey, what if Dean's telling the story from that parallel world? Or there's multiple ones because we found one world. How could there not be multiples in that? So my personal opinion is you don't have a very good story if John's not a hunter. So they have to make their origin story a hunter, and they're going to have homages to the original story, like the very first episode where they meet out front of the movie theater. And that's the movie they watched when they went on their first date. So like those little pieces are there. The one thing that we still haven't gotten to is we still haven't got to the Black Impala. Like, I'm not sure how that's going to happen because of some of the history that they're changing. Because really, John buys the Impala to impress Mary, and Dean travels back in time to help his dad pick out the car. So like you have this weird, time travel always gets weird.
Yeah,
so
of course.
I'm not mad at it. It's just like, oh, okay, that's different. Oh, okay, that's not quite what they said. But they never go back in time. It's not like you get a clear understanding of what happened. And if you know anything about Mary and John, especially John and even their characters in this, they don't really tell you the whole truth.
Yeah, exactly.
So do we have it right? Did this actually happen? Like, did they just not tell their kids? Is this like a secret? Like, we don't know. Maybe we get to the end of this whole show and they get their memory wiped by an angel, by Castiel, the angel that's in there. So they never remember it. Like, that could literally happen because Castiel could do that.
Yeah.
And then he requires them to come back and help and all those other things. So there's a lot of ways that you can go from this whole story just all of a sudden not being known and no one knowing that this actually happened. The The biggest issue I've had so far with it is they have thrown so much lore at people super fast.
It's a lot.
And it's a lot. Like a lot of what we're getting here. And in this episode, we're going to bring in gods. Like, we didn't know gods existed for like 6 seasons. Like, we had no idea we're getting into that. So we've had demons, we've had monsters, and now we're at gods. It's like, okay, here's the whole universe. We're going to get it all out of the way in the first season. That way we can go maybe into detail on the other pieces. So they're just throwing a ton at you. So I'm almost more concerned for newcomers of the show of being like, okay, this is overwhelming. Like, I don't really understand this world that we got in doses over, whatever it was, 15 seasons. So 15 years of going through that, 20 some odd years over time, because they had, breaks in between. So, but overall, I've been satisfied with it. It's a fun show.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. As a newcomer, I've definitely enjoyed it.
And we're definitely running into some like monsters and stuff that we didn't have in Supernatural.
Okay.
Like, I hadn't heard of a lot of these. So it's not like they're just reusing the monsters over again. We're getting new things and new lore that we just didn't have before. So I don't know how that could be a bad thing. It's always like when you get into Marvel stuff. Everyone's going to be like, oh, that doesn't follow the comics. Well, it doesn't have to. Like, I can change things. This is really Dean's character. So Jensen's vision of what he thought this was going to be, because Supernatural was his baby for so long. And they were just like, you know what, let's tell this story. And it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. Let's see what happens, and let's tell it in a different way. But I will be upset if they start breaking like heavy lore things that say we know for a fact that happened in Supernatural, and like that'll start to get me upset. There's a couple of demons that we know these guys meet. So if they don't meet them the right way in there, because we were told exactly how it happened, then I'll kind of get upset with lore breaking. But everything we've had up to this point is just hearsay. Like, yeah, Dean could have found this diary, and he's reading through from this diary about his parents, and we know John and Mary are not the most trustworthy and has a whole lot of secrets, even from Supernatural. And now we're finding that goes all the way back to them as kids.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's get into this episode.
Let's go ahead and jump in. So this is episode 4. I apologize, as I'm going to take the lead on this, and Ender is going to be, as he called it,
just color commentary.
Color commentary here.
Here to add.
So episode 4, Masters of War. We jump right in, and we see this gentleman. We're at the Hannibal Hospital.
I love how
Missouri.
It's Hannibal Hospital.
Yeah, I had to. Why? It's funny that I rewound this 3 times. I was like, is this some sort of like trailer for a new Hannibal Lecter show on CW? I was like, didn't even realize the show was starting. But this guy, this gentleman is walking out of a room, and he's yelling at a bunch of people. He's walking through the hospital, and the hospital starts to change. And immediately, I kind of understood what's going on. You start to hear kind of war sounds, explosions. So I was like, kind of understanding the show. I thought to myself, okay, obviously some sort of PTSD situation is happening here. I don't know what room in this hospital that he walked out of, but I can only imagine that's what he's going through. He has an explosion happen in the hallway, and he's terrified, so he runs into this hallway. And as he gets in the hallway, he hears this noise of like it is a sword being dragged across the ground. Spear, sorry. He turns around and sees this guy that looks very human in a Halloween costume.
So that's the kind of one of the things that I was really kind of upset here. Well,
he doesn't look like a monster.
No, this wardrobe is not the greatest.
No, I thought this was very much like they were like at the last second they're like, wait, we don't have a costume for this monster. Run to every studio down the aisle until you find one that can piece this together.
Yeah, so it was just I was very upset with the wardrobe on this particular character, because all the other monsters have been really, really well
Really intense,
done,
yeah.
and intense. But the thing you're gonna get with Supernatural is not everything is a monster.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's humans, sometimes it's demons, sometimes it's ghosts. Like we haven't gotten into a lot of the basic stuff. So here, based off of the last 2 episodes where they have been like monsters, you know, the one vine lady creepy thing, and then the last one you had the kid stealing boogeyman in the bag. So this was kind of, I was just kind of like, you know what went through my mind, like the Peacemaker character. I was like, that's how cheesy this thing looks. It's like, is that what, like, John Cena's here? I didn't know John Cena was going to be in this as Peacemaker.
I mean, that's exactly, it looked like some cheesy wrestling costume. But anyways, this guy, the gentleman that goes into the hospital, he's an older guy. He's still kind of freaking out. And a spear like just appears in his hand. And next thing you know, he starts to go towards the guy. The screen cuts with blood being splattered. It cuts with the Winchesters logo. And we started the episode and you hear a scream. One can only imagine at this point that he was killed. So
classic opening. This is very classic opening here, where you get some weird thing. So you get a city of where they're at. You get some kind of, you know, scared person running away from something. You get a kind of a look at what it might be, and then you cut to some blood splatter. Like, that is just classic starting of a Supernatural and obviously now Winchester scene. So that it was very homage back to just the first season of how things were, and that's really how they start almost every episode.
Yeah, and I said this in my 2 episodes where I was by myself. It gives me very much Legends of Tomorrow vibes, the way the show is done. And that could be because Legends was modeled off of Supernatural, for all I know. I mean, it could have been the other way around.
I'm not sure which way it was, but yeah, I think they all have that opening scene. It's very CW. Yeah, you know, it's very, very CW opening across the board with a lot of their shows.
All right, so the next scene we're back in Lawrence, Kansas, and I'm assuming we are outside of Mary's house, where everyone's kind of holed up, and you see them sparring one-on-one. He's obviously dealing with some issues and some anger issues. She's holding the gloves, and she eventually puts down the gloves and decides that they're going to spar one-on-one. Now, Ender, I don't know how in-depth you paid attention to my last 2 episodes, but what I've noticed, episode 1, 2, and 3, I like to call them bookends. After the opening credits come on and we get into the story, we've always had something between Mary and John at the very beginning, and then it bookends it with the exact same type of situation at the end of the episode. So in episode 1, I can vividly remember it had to do with the coffee. In episode 2, it was the blood being splattered in his mouth at the beginning and end. I can't exactly remember what it was in 3. But here I was immediately thinking, okay, one of these, I immediately thought, at the end of this episode, John's going to fight a monster one-on-one.
Yeah, and again, these are following classic patterns. They haven't broken away from it. So that is just kind of how these episodes are written. You do have a lot of times what you get in the episodes are whatever demon they're fighting inside of themselves. Somehow they run into a monster that is attacking them that relates to that. Yeah. So that's kind of how they grow their characters. So you start learning their fears and their desires through the monsters they have to fight.
Yeah.
You know, like with demons, they know them. So if they possess it, they know things about the person that they possess. With some monsters, or they can read their minds or anything at that point. Or you're just learning through the episode of like, okay, his hand shaking, he's fighting, you know, what's going on? This might be, and even in the beginning of the episodes, you're going to get something like this guy's yelling and he's thinking of war. And, you know, John just came from war and is dealing with a form of PTSD. Like, we know he's dealing with that. We've seen those flashbacks. So they are setting that up to bookend the episode. And that's why I love this show. And one of the reasons why I love this type of show is because I know at the end of this show, something's going to get resolved. There's going to be a monster. I'm going to attack
Correct.
it. There's
Yeah,
going to be a resolution.
they have a. Again, that is
They have
extremely
an arc
CW.
in the episode.
They have the episodes always resolve in all the CW shows, but there's always the continuous story for the season.
So you get little underlying traces of the overall season story, but every one of your episodes bookends. So you have a beginning and an end.
Correct.
And you learn something about the characters for the long story.
I mean, this goes all the way back to Buffy.
Yeah, it does.
Right? I mean,
it's
even
it's
maybe
your
even before that.
CW, USA, like any of your cable, TBS shows.
Oh God, USA to me had the best one. It was called Burn Notice.
I've watched Burn Notice maybe 45 times,
same.
all the way through. Like I know that, but again, USA's best show is Psych, and probably the best show of all time is Psych.
Yeah.
But Burn Notice, another great one. Like I love shows that follow that because I'm one that I don't want to have to think a lot for every show I watch.
Yeah, have some resolution.
I can't sit there and have House of the Dragon every single night and try I can't have Lost, House of the Dragon, and all of them going at once. I need a show that's going to be like beginning, middle, end, little breadcrumb in there that I can follow and keep tracing throughout all of them.
So let me jump back into this. So they're doing their sparring, and I like how you called out how it was very dry between these two characters at the beginning. You can see that they're actively building that chemistry as the episodes go on. We have it here again. We know that Mary just got off of a date, kind of an impromptu date at the movies at the end of last episode. And here she is having this spar with John. A little bit of flirtation. Carlos comes and interrupts them and kind of teases them about some sort of mating ritual that's going on. But he says that he says that they need to get inside because they need to talk. And you kind of already assume as a viewer, all right, they're about to go into some sort of monster thing. So they go inside, and Lada is just basically begging Carlos to lead off the discussion, and he's confused because he never gets to lead with her. So he finally
he just complained in the last episode that he wasn't the leader of the band. Like, I'm just like, you're getting your opportunity to be the leader here, and you're not taking it. Come on, Carlos. Come on. And it really comes down to like Carlos wants to be the leader and from Mary. He wants to like guide the team more. But then, in the creepy underground like tree monster one, he's like, you gotta stop following Samuel. Like, you gotta be your own leader. So they're all, and this is very different this is what makes this show very different than Supernatural, is we have a group.
And not just
Supernatural was just the brothers.
Yeah.
It was 1 and 2, and they're always solo and they didn't work with anybody else. But I like the group dynamic here because you're getting a lot more character development between them, and you're getting to see them interact more than two brothers brooding and fighting each other. Like that's Supernatural.
Yeah. So essentially, Carlos starts to talk about this deal that happened with the murder that we saw at the beginning of the episode at the hospital. And Lada comes in and explains exactly, kind of breaking down what it is. They also find out here that apparently John is the only one that doesn't know. He looks at Carlos like he's crazy for being upset about veterans and all this other stuff. And Carlos admits to him that he used to be in the Navy during the Vietnam War.
Navy.
And John just looks super confused. And Carlos is just like, look, I don't like boasting that I worked for Uncle Sam for years. I keep it to myself, which is gonna open up as the episode goes on. We're gonna learn why he doesn't like to talk about it.
So I had an odd feeling that was gonna be part of this, that he was part of some kind of law enforcement military group, because he's very trained.
Mm-hmm.
Like you watch him, and it's not hunter training because it sounds like he hasn't been doing it for a while.
Yeah,
he's not hasn't been doing it his whole life like Mary. And even if you watch Mary, she's very raw. It's not trained, but a lot of Carlos's stuff is very trained. Like it's really smart to put your holy water in a squirt gun. Like, and so he has these tactics that you kind of watch and you're just like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
It starts to make sense why he is tactical.
Yeah,
the way he is.
I mean, just even the first episode where he leaves because he sees something right and he goes gets the exact weapon he needs and is back in time. Like he's thinking that way of attacking.
Correct. But I like here they talk about how this death has been ruled a suicide. And of course, Carlos and Lada explain that based on the singe marks, there was burn marks. and there was some sort of cut. So obviously hospitals and all that don't think that monsters and all those things are real. This group knows better. So they think it's something, and I like how they already, Lotta and Mary are already speculating. Mary thinks it's a dragon. Lotta thinks it's this guy with a flaming sword or something. Manticore, yeah. So
yeah. So if you ever watched the what is it called? There's a Disney movie that has a manticore in it. I can't remember what it was, but yeah. So she thinks it's a manticore, and it's funny because she says manticore, and immediately I'm like, nope, too clean of cuts. Yeah. And it's like, and then the other one was a dragon. I'm like, Mary, you're crazy. You're crazy, Mary. Dragon, Mary. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. No, no way.
Carlos gets his dig in there because apparently dragons only kill virgins, and Carlos is like, I don't have to worry.
They only kill virgins, and they're protecting gold, and like no gold was stolen. It's like one of the things is like when you get a lot of virgins that are getting killed, and all of a sudden all their gold is taken, like you've got a dragon on your hands.
So now they decide that they need to go check out this body.
And dragons are super rare.
Okay, they're not
like that's one thing is dragons are very rare.
All right. Well, they got to borrow them from HBO. They're expensive.
These dragons are not HBO dragons. They look like people.
So, Mary, obviously, they come up with a plan. They need lab coats, fake IDs. Carlos is going to be on that. Lotta's going to call the hospital. So they need to get into the hospital morgue so they can check out Patch's body, which is the name of the guy that the hospital thinks committed suicide, but they think was murdered.
So it's also interesting here how much this is very different. And I'm just going to call it out that in Supernatural, they normally go as like police officers or FBI agents or things like that. But here, I think because they're so much younger, they're finding like different ways to get into places through costumes and like student IDs and things like that. So it's very different because normally they would always go as law enforcement. Like that's just the nature of it, and here they're not doing it at all.
Yeah. So as they start to kind of break up and go their separate ways, John says, hey, I just need to take a shower, then we're good to go. He goes to walk into a bedroom, which immediately I thought this setup was kind of weird, because I was like, bro, you've been there for a couple of days and you're just going to go to this random room. You need a shower and you're about to walk into a random door you've never walked into before.
Well, I don't think he's staying there because his mom's place is close.
Correct.
By.
Yeah. But
so
still,
I don't think he knows. Like maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, it was.
I thought it was weird.
Poorly set up.
Yeah. So Mary slams the door and says, "We don't go in there," and he's kind of confused, and she walks away. And Lotta comes out, sees the situation, lets John know that was Maggie's room, and since Maggie had died, no one had ever been there. Mary stops on the stairs and hears this conversation taking place, so she kind of knows that John's being told what happened. And we move forward. Now, before we move on from the Maggie thing, I just want to ask you, Ender, my theory right now is this Akrita lady walking around. I feel like that's Maggie.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if
because the demon already said that they possessed it. Yeah, exactly. But I feel like it's going to be Maggie. So when they have to fight, it would be a good
turn. It would be a classic turn there of like you have to fight this thing that's wearing, your cousin that was dead. So I could see that. Like I could very easily see that being the way that would be a good theory there. I'm also wondering if it's like Mary's mom. We haven't really heard anything there either. So we haven't seen
because she's trying to get a hold of her mom and she can't right now.
Yeah. So like I'm wondering there too if that's the case. But either one of the I think you're probably right there. Okay. That's not a reach in this show by any stretch of the imagination, especially because a lot of the demon did say something about it, and two, they want to make it hurt. So like they want to make this a struggle for you to be able to take them down. And that would be one way. You got to stare someone that you know in the face and stab them in, whatever it is, however you kill an Akrita, which I don't think you can. Like, we don't know this box isn't working.
Yeah.
So we kind of have to fix the box first.
All right. So we get to the hospital. We see Mary, John, and Lotta pushing a cart. Somebody tries to stop them. I thought this was a little bit of an unnecessary scene. They basically have to manipulate their way. I guess it's just to show that they really had a struggle to get into the morgue side. But this lady eventually lets them through.
Well, see,
Carlos.
it's also think that this is very classic pattern here for Supernatural, but it's not funny. So like every time this happens in Supernatural where they struggle to get into somewhere, it's a funny moment in the episode of what they have to come up with or say.
Oh, gotcha.
Or
So
you hear like
it's not hitting with
it's
the
not
show.
hitting at all
Okay.
to the show because I just think Carlos wasn't in this one. Like Carlos would be the one that would have that humor,
That quip.
that quip that you would get, because a lot of times the humor is like, what name is Dean going to come up with? So you know how they're getting all these names. So one of the things Dean would do, and they're trying to hit this home, is he would give them like rock star names or dumb names that they would give, and you were always waiting to hear like what name, and that was that part. Like what name are they going to give the person to get in? Like who are they going to be this time? That this person,
and they had that a couple episodes ago with Mick Fleetwood and Christy McVie.
Yeah. So they try to do that. So I was expecting that here, but it was just kind of like
generic.
Hey, we've got a body and we're trying to get to the morgue. This one's going to start stinking. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's not funny. It didn't hit. Like it wasn't very funny there.
So they get in there. Of course, Carlos gets himself out of the bag. No one seems to help him. He's upset that he had to be in the bag. And basically, Mary reminds him that it's because he's not good at rock, paper, scissors. And he argues that where there's no place in the world where paper beats rock.
I have to agree with him.
I mean, I agree with him.
I never understood why paper covering a rock wins.
It covers the rock. So,
well, why would it win? It's not going to like, I mean, I guess you could like hold a piece of paper and throw a rock through it. But if paper is just covering rock, I don't but anyway, that doesn't matter. Every time I hear paper, rock, scissors, all I can think about is Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
With paper, rock, scissors, lizard, Spock.
Yeah. Yeah. So they open up this body, Mary and Carlos, Lana, and John, and they see all the cuts and the cauterized cuts. They realize that this is, it can't be the monsters that they were thinking of, right? Because there's no claws or teeth. So they think it's some sort of blade, sword, spear, could be any of those things. But they definitely know that at this point it's not a suicide because of the way the blood was splattered, the way the cuts are. In the middle of this, John looks down and he sees the personal effects of Patches, one being a cross, and we get this immediate flashback to his buddy that was wearing the cross. Murphy, who had stepped on the landmine.
Yeah, and again, I think here's where you are getting kind of your bookends again, like PTSD. We're getting these flashbacks. We kind of had a military flashback for that character. Now he's a serviceman. We find out that Carlos is in the service. Like we are laying the story out to deal with veterans. Like we now know that's what we're dealing with.
So they hear somebody coming, and it ends up being Patches' wife, and they all kind of hustle to get back in their spots. Carlos is trying to get back in the bag. She comes in and basically says she's there to pick up her belongings. Mary says, "I'm sorry for your loss." And she goes on to look at John and realize that he's holding the cross that was her husband. So he gives it back. He says, "Thank you for your service." And in the middle of this, he's like, he had been kind of freaking out and shaking. So once he gives it back, he says, "I'm sorry. Thank you for your service." And he disappears. So Mary's left there alone with Patches' wife. And we come to find out that she was very sad for her husband and knew that he was dealing with stuff. And that apparently one of the doctors was not getting along with Patches, and they did not have a good relationship. So, but his wife seems to think, I understand that the doctor was probably just doing his job. But Mary decides to kind of dig a little bit and ask her a few other questions, and the wife eventually says, I haven't had anyone ask me this, or I've had multiple people ask me this, and she says, who else?
Second time, yeah.
This is the second time I've heard this, and she says, who else has asked you this? And she hands her a business card of a reporter, a journalist. Yeah. And Mary just says, I know this guy. And that's all we know at that point.
Yeah. So here you kind of get, Mary has her first lead. His name was
Kyle Reed.
Yeah. Kyle Reed. And Mary has her first lead because, okay, why is he not getting along with his, therapist? And again, you would think if you are, trying to feed off of people or have these fights or something like that, that could be a perfect cover because you're in a psych ward. And again, for people that have seen Supernatural, you immediately go back to multiple episodes where monsters are in psych wards because they can feed on the people that are there, and everyone thinks they're just crazy. So like no one's going to guess that someone in a psych ward, or they're not really a psych ward, but a veterans hospital for psychiatric care is going to, oh, I'm seeing monsters. Like no one's going to believe them. So it's a perfect cover for a monster.
Yeah, and it plays into that all the stigma and all we know about how all the tragedies in psych wards of years past too, right? Like it really fits kind of the narrative and the stereotype of what went on back then. But from there, we cut over to John, who ran to the bathroom. And I mean, this guy is having a PTSD
he's having a
breakdown that rivals anything we've seen so far in the show. And it really starts to hit home if you know anybody that deals with this. I mean, this episode became very hard for me to watch with my brother being a military person.
Yeah. You know, being that I've grown up in DC, like I know a lot of people that have been in and out of the military and deal with this. I used to work with a guy that was dealing with it, where we would have to be super careful on, you know, how hard we close a door, or if we drop something or anything like that can spawn some of these attacks that they get and make them super jumpy. And you got to remember, like, this wasn't a good war he was in. You know, it was a terrible war, and he watched someone blow up in front of him. You just don't get over that.
Exactly.
It's not something you just get over. So seeing him break down here, I'm not surprised, but it seems like it's progressively getting worse for him.
Correct. Yeah. So he ends up punching this paper towel dispenser, it looks like. I mean,
yeah, that thing crumbled.
And before he did that, he was completely freaking out and shaking. Once he punched it, it kind of like it calmed him down. Yeah. But in the middle of this, he looks in the mirror, and in the mirror, he sees the hooded figure that Patches saw at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, the mask guy. With the spear.
But when he turns around, the mask guy is not there anymore.
Yep. Yeah, so super weird. And again, they don't really know what they're looking for. So in his mind, I don't think he knows that he just saw it. He still thinks he's hallucinating because it's in the middle of one of these breakdowns.
So we go out of the hallway, and Mary seems very concerned about John. They're walking, and she asks if he's okay, and he just lies, obviously, and says he just had a bad breakfast. So to none the wiser, she's just kind of like, oh, okay, you know, she doesn't understand what he may or may not be dealing with. So
I think she has an idea, though. She's not dumb.
Yeah, she's not dumb, but she
knows he's lying to her.
She definitely thinks. I don't think she understands the extent of the issues he's having, because immediately I was like, wow, you are dumb.
Well, I think she says
her and Lotta are going to go deal with this Kyle Reed guy. They have a lead, and she wants him and Carlos to check into the psych ward where Patches was, to be patient. So she's like, I hope you and Carlos are ready to tell your best war stories. And she's kind of like semi-smiling, and he just looks seriously like, what the hell? And she's like, because you're enrolling in Patches' psych group. Therapy group.
Yeah, again, I think some of these things are just not landing. I'm not sure it was just good dialogue. Like, I feel like there's a lot of other ways we could have done that, and they're almost trying to make Mary be way too much of a hard ass all the time, and like make her feel like she has zero feeling, when that's not really true. And when you even watch the Supernatural show, you know Mary does care for all the people around her, and that's like a super important thing. And even in the last couple episodes, that's what we've been getting. And then we have these like randomness of like, just like, okay, I'm this hardcore person now, I'm going to be exactly like my dad. You're going in, tell your war stories. Like, okay. That doesn't really fit with you, but all right, we'll move on.
Yeah. So we cut back to the Winchesters' garage, and we see John's mom, and John walks out. He's, dressed in his uniform. His mom says, oh, is there a parade today? And he says, no, there's a service for Patches, but he's also going to enroll in this therapy group. because he kind of lets his mom knows kind of what they're up to and what they're doing and what they're
I guess
trying to figure
mom
out,
knows a
so.
whole lot more than she's leading on.
Correct, yeah. But he is open and he talks with her, so that's really good there. But I like how she jokes. She says, "Oh, you're gonna go talk about our feelings? That's not really our strong suit." And they have obviously a good mother-son relationship there, and I thought that was really important to see that she understands that he probably just keeps everything in because he always has. And in the middle of this, you hear a horn honk and the van pulls up and Carlos gets out and he walks out in his navy whites.
Sailor boy.
And his mom just kind of looks him up and down and he introduces himself and she even calls him out that it's quite a different look. And I don't know if she's trying to semi-hit on him or not, but she does. Everyone loves a man in uniform, and he says even other men in uniform.
Yeah, and I think it's just the stigma. Like nothing.
But that was one of those
other.
jokes
Yeah,
that, or the humor that lands, right?
It lands. Yeah,
but again, because
funny.
it's Carlos.
Yeah, because it's Carlos, he can do that, and you expect that. And at the end of the day, man, navy whites are always the best uniform.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Like
absolutely.
navy whites are the greatest, and I love how it because of the time frame, we're in the old school sailor suits. Like we don't wear those anymore, but it's nice to see them out because the whites are always great.
Yeah,
my dad has his dress whites, and they're always the best uniform.
I love the last little line here as they're starting to walk away. John's mom says, I think her name's Millie, correct?
Millie, yeah.
Millie says, "Hey, if they start telling you it's the mother's fault, you better time to leave." And he says, "We all know it's Dad's fault." Anyways, and they, so I like the little back and forth.
Now, as a father, I take that a little bit of like,
correct. Yes,
it's my fault. Come on.
Yeah, I understand, but it's nice to see that they're building this relationship with him and his mom.
But I do know if anybody's going to break our kids, it's going to be me.
Yeah.
It's not going to be my wife.
So this episode moves along pretty smoothly. We get straight to the hospital, and they're trying to check in. They get signed up for therapy. Come to find out, they are not with the therapist that Patches had. So Carlos and John kind of do a little sweet talking. It ends up being Carlos. They sweet talk, and they eventually get put into the correct therapy group.
It's the uniform, man. Come on. It's the whites.
Correct,
You're not getting through with the Marine uniform. The Marines are just a branch of the Navy. Remember that.
Yeah. So now we immediately cut over.
Tell a Marine that.
we cut over to Mary and Lotta, who are walking through the park, and they're going to go meet up with this Kyle Reed. And as they get, as they're walking, they talk a little bit about the situation with Maggie and the room, and basically, Lotta's like, if you ever want to really get in to talk about it, I'm here. It's kind of just letting each other know that they're there for each other. And it's like they're just starting to pull back another layer of this Maggie situation when it comes to Mary and Lotta in the group. So just little breadcrumbs, I think. As we get closer, she points out the guy that she's there to meet, and we see that it is the reporter that she ran into at the movies, that she was on her impromptu date. She gets a dime from Lotta because she owes him a dime. And Lotta gets all excited and trying to get all dolled up because she thinks he's cute, and she's upset why Mary didn't say anything. And Mary's like, because I knew you would act like this. That's why I didn't tell you. She goes over to the guy, and before they even start talking, she gets the dime. He kind of laughs.
I think they need to give Lotta a little bit more front room, man. She's a cutie too.
Yeah,
so get over there, Lotta. Talk to him. Let's go. It's not just the Mary show.
But I thought this was interesting because she starts to... It looks like he's like ready to be like, oh, you called me because our date went so well. I'm ready for date number 2. She immediately kind of pulls it back, goes already into lying about being related to this Patches, and she heard that he was investigating it, and she's like, yeah, it's a small world, right? And she just wants to make sure, he's not exploiting the story. And he eventually comes out. He's like, that's not what I'm doing. I've been following this around because there's these veterans dying in psych hospitals all over the country. I've been following the story. Like, from his point of view, he's trying to see if the psych therapists or the hospitals are killing these people and not claiming suicide.
Yeah, he turns out to be actually a good guy here, because I think she's going into this of thinking he's exploiting the stories and possibly being part of this whole issue or ring that's going on, covering him up or something. But he's kind of, going into this as, hey, I've got all these stories and I'm into this. Now, I feel like we're going to end up getting more of him throughout the episodes, because if he's tracking this one odd story, you got a feeling we're going to have him tracking other odd stories.
Yeah, and it is weird. They went on one date and then he's just going to disappear. But I also thought, like, well, maybe that's how they're trying to close him off, because obviously she's already starting this with a lie.
Yeah, I just think you're going to start
pretty big
running.
lie.
So there are, again, in Supernatural over the seasons, there are people that they continue to run into that are not necessarily in the hunting world, but are in the we're going to report on freaky things that happen. And of course, the hunters happen to pop up all the time. So after you get 2 or 3 or 4 run-ins with the same people, you're kind of like, bad things happen. You show up. Like, why is this a coincidence?
Yeah.
And they start to become their friends. And they start to call them up and saying, hey, I've got another one of these things. So I wouldn't be surprised if we find this reporter and, like, I actually thought that's how it was going to go. Like, they were going to save him in, like, this terrible situation or something like that. Or he was going to be in the middle of it and learn that the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows and become someone that they help with. That's not exactly how this turns out, but that's where I thought we were going to go with it, with that interaction, because the guy seems so sincere, but he just doesn't know monsters are real. Yeah. And once you know that, you're almost stuck in being in this world. You can't get out of it again. You can't unknow it.
All right, so this therapist, I'm going to refer to him as Dr. Z, because I don't want to keep saying his name over and over and over. I'm going to run through this whole kind of scene right here, Ender, and then kind of let you break down your thoughts. As we walk in, John and Carlos are kind of bantering a little bit. John's like, okay, there's Dr. Z. How are we got to have some sort of distraction, because Carlos needs to be able to go to his office. And he's like, well, how do we get a distraction? Carlos says, when we start talking, I'll show you. And I was like, well, that was bland. So then Carlos kind of walks one way. John walks the other. He goes over to the food and donuts. There's an older gentleman there kind of looking at all the fruit cups and things. And he tells John.
I love the fruit cups being the canned fruit cups.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. I just had to point that out.
They're amazing.
It's like, ooh, they didn't ruin this time frame. Like, sometimes you get that when you have you go back in time and stuff, you don't get that right. They have, like, the plastic fruit cups, but they wouldn't have that.
I feel like a lot of times CW, all their shows, if they do time stuff, they're usually pretty good at details. So the guy tells John not to get the donuts. They kind of have a little bit of banter back and forth. He tells him to just stick to the fruit cups, and they build up a little camaraderie right there. It's almost like going into a meeting and there's like,
well, you save a guy from a bad donut, you become best friends.
But it is true. If you go to that uncomfortable meeting, like a group, anything, I don't care if it's work, a therapy session, whatever, there's always that one person you kind of bond with before everything starts. And that's like your corner, the person that you know is you're going to be in each other's corner during this group session that clearly no one wants to be a part of. So that's what we have, and we go right into the therapy session. And you hear one of the guys talking, and he kind of ends his story. And Dr. Z says, that's great. Is there anyone next? And Carlos decides to jump up. And I thought, okay, here comes the funny part. Here's the distraction, because he does this whole thing where he raises his hand and he points his finger to himself and he's smirking and he's smiling. And as Carlos starts to talk about being a Navy medic, he tells this story about seeing when he's in the Viet Cong, he sees from the ship, he's like scouting essentially. And he sees all these like red lights going off in the forest area, and they're like Christmas lights. And then he reminds himself that they're not Christmas lights. They're the cherries on the cigarettes of the Viet Cong. And he learns that just as he's there to watch them, they're watching him and his unit. And you can see that as he's telling this story, it went from him trying to be kind of funny and nonchalant to he really starts opening up, where you realize that he clearly has some PTSD issues himself. And this story got really real quick.
Yeah, so I think...
And I'll let you jump in here, Ender, and break us to this point.
I mean, I think you said everything there. You don't come out of that the same. You don't leave the same. And it's not a funny situation regardless of how you're trying to deal with it. So I think we start to see that Carlos's humor and the way he carries himself about is really his defense mechanism that he has for all
And I
of
can
these
relate
things
to
they
that.
spin.
That is how I
Yeah.
get through life. I don't
Yeah,
obviously I
and
wasn't in the military or anything, but I use humor to mask
but I
everything.
think the other part here is he's also a medic. So you've got to imagine what he saw and the things that he saw. Like he wasn't necessarily the front line guy, but he's seeing these guys come back and trying to have to
From the
take
front
care of
line.
them from
Yeah.
the front line and trying to save their lives. And how many of them was he not able to?
Mm-hmm.
So over that time, he does have a funny joke in there where he's like, my worst haircut I've ever had. And, no one looks good in a shaved head, military shaved head, especially with his long flowing locks that he has.
Yeah.
So
it went from joking to serious really quickly.
To serious. And, you feel for Carlos and you get a second layer to him. Like this isn't just all fun and games. He's seen some poop here, some bad things. And you're just, the one thing about being a hunter is it never starts good and it never ends good. Like it's always trauma that gets you into it, and it's always trauma that gets you out of it. Like, you basically die. No one leaves it. You get a hunter's funeral. And we'll start. I'm sure we'll meet hunters that die throughout this, and you'll get into the hunter's funeral thing and what they do. But you don't get into monster hunting because you had a good childhood.
Yeah.
Or a good something. Something has happened
Gotcha.
that brought you into it. A death, a monster eating somebody, something. And we're seeing, for him, he had all this trauma when he was away and then came back and started hunting monsters. So and his family died. Like, not only did he have this Viet Cong issue, we also found out that all his family was killed. That's got him into this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's a lot of trauma for one person to have.
Yeah. So now I thought it was interesting though, because Carlos uses this. It's like he snaps back into the Carlos that we've seen the first couple of episodes, kind of the joking. He bounces out of it really quickly. They thank him for sharing, and he immediately says, well, with that being said, I need to go freshen up. So he uses it as a way to be able to leave the room without being anyone questioning why he's leaving the room, because obviously he just shared a very emotional experience. Any therapist or anybody would understand if they want to excuse themselves for a moment to kind of get their thoughts back together.
And that's where it's real. Like,
Yeah.
this story is real because you're not going to sell that to somebody that's there to pick up on lies and therapists.
Correct,
and things
yeah.
like that. So it has to be true. He has to tell you the truth here. And that's
key to this, really.
It's key to this, and it's also key to how dedicated he is to this mission that he can snap himself back in.
Yeah.
Like that's training. You've been trained to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as he's leaving, he throws John under the bus and says, my buddy would like to go next. Yeah. And now I thought it was interesting because Dr. Z looks at him and says, hey, nice to meet you, John. Why don't you, tell us about yourself? And I thought it was interesting how they portrayed this Dr. Z, because they give him this look and vibe about him that looks like, okay, maybe he is doing something sketchy.
They're trying to point you in that direction. They're trying to point him as the bad guy. And, and you see a very different dynamic between how John told his story and how Carlos told his.
Yeah.
John is very I was here. We did this stuff. My buddy stepped on a mine and he blew up. There's no real, he's not trying to show emotion, but you see his hand shaking like crazy. Like we know something's going on with him while he's trying to not show any emotion here, because his emotion is anger. That's what he's using that's his thing. He gets angry with it because he couldn't save his friend.
Now the doctor does get him to talk, and he does tell his story about his friend stepping on the mine, and it's emotional. We kind of go through step by step exactly what has happened. But as he gets to the end, like you said,
he's trying to say it without the emotion. He's trying to make it factual.
But you can see
he's fine.
Yeah, at the end, he shows his anger, like you said, and he says, my friend died, and all I got was this lousy scar. And of course, the doctor, I think the doctor does a good job here. He says, I'm sorry for your loss, John. thank you for sharing. He tries to go into a little bit more of, kind of, well, how does that make you feel? Which just drives me absolutely nuts. But before we get into more to that, we cut right over to Carlos, who's breaking into the doctor's office. He finds the file for Patches, and the only thing we see is that the subject was complaining about a figure with masked horns. So now we know that Patches was complaining to the doctor. Now, as we cut back to the therapy room, what's that now?
No one's gonna. I was just saying, like before,
they think they're crazy.
No one believes you. They think they're crazy.
Yeah. Now, as we cut back, we see the doc is kind of leaning on John a little bit more to get more out of him. I think he's trying to do it. He's just doing his job essentially. And in the middle of this, the gentleman that was talking with John over the donuts and the fruit cup goes off on the doctor and says, "Why don't you cut him a break? Leave him alone." The doctor tries to tell the guy to calm down, and he yells. He refers to him as Jimmy. He says, "Jimmy, he tells everyone we're going to take a 10-minute break, and Jimmy, come to my office." And Jimmy kind of throws his hands up and gets upset. And he says, "Like hell," and he walks off. So he kind of causes this big scene. Now, of course, John, I just talked about this. You have that little person that you've made that camaraderie with, feels bad because this was all interaction with his situation, decides he needs to go chase after Jimmy to see if he's okay, because that is the type of person John is. He's always feels like he needs to help other people, right? That's something we've seen kind of repeated over the first 3 episodes. So he starts to chase Jimmy down the hallway, and as he's yelling, he says, "Hey, what happened between Dr. Z and Patches? I want to know more information." And as he turns the corner, Jimmy's gone. No one's there. Now, he goes around the next corner and he walks down the hallway, starts to hear some stuff, and he sees Jimmy go in this room, very similar to what Patches did. And we see the blood get splattered across the room. He runs in, and Jimmy's dead. So, and then, of course, John starts having all this PTSD from seeing Patches, from seeing his buddy dead, kind of going all over the place, and he's starting to freak and shake and go nuts. So now we've had Patches die, and we've had Jimmy die. At this point, we can assume it's the same masked figure with the horns and the spear. That what happened to Jimmy is the same thing that happened to Patches.
Yep. Agreed. Not much more we can go into there. That's exactly what happened.
So we get on the phone, and Carlos is calling into Mary and Lada. They're explaining everything that's going on. They're talking about how Jimmy is dead, but he's got the same cauterized wounds that Patches did. And John's like, "I couldn't stop it." Like, John is angry at himself that he wasn't able to get to Jimmy and help him with the situation. So I found it interesting here that it's just more anger building up in John as we go through this. Now, I was very confused because I'm like, Carlos is literally holding the file that talks about the mask and everything that was there. John saw this mask figure. Have they not? I'm literally screaming. My inner self is screaming. I'm like, have they not communicated what's on this file yet? It's literally open in Carlos's hand. How come John hasn't mentioned? But basically, Carlos eventually tells Mary and Lada what that is. And they say it's nothing that we've come across before. It's some sort of
some mythological
creature.
And then that the Mena letters don't have any history that goes back that far, It's all they had to go find this history from somewhere else.
Yeah. And then we find out that John's getting super upset. He says, whatever this is, he isn't it. John knows it couldn't have been Dr. Z that killed Jimmy or Patches because he was in the session. Dr. Z would have had to go through him to get to Jimmy at this point. But he thinks that Dr. Z knows about this masked figure and knows what's going on, and it's just a cover up.
Well, yeah. So I think, if someone's complaining about this and they're assuming they're dying to this spear with cauterized wounds, and then they're saying it's a suicide, but you can obviously tell it's not a suicide. Somebody is helping this situation. You don't get all of these anomalies together without, somebody kind of pushing the paperwork through or pushing this down the road. So it may not be him that's actually committing these murders, but he knows something he's not telling.
Correct. Yeah, that's definitely is what John's going out. Now we cut over to Mary and Lotta as they hang up the phone. And this is where Lotta explains to Mary, hey, you can stop looking for any books around here because the men of letters don't have anything. I think she said something about white men with pre-Christian, anything pre-Christianity.
Yeah, they don't have anything pre-Christian, which is like,
but she,
really? I mean,
that was another dig that I feel like wasn't necessary in the show, but it was to set up this
it's 1970s,
but it was to set up this next line, which was, but I think I know where we can find a book.
But they have information on the Akrita. Like, that's where I'm like pissed off about this. It's like, oh, we wouldn't have anything that goes back to like, you know, gods or anything. And I'm just like, but they have Akrita information. Like, they have this box.
So it contradicts itself.
It contradicts everything here. And
but it was to set up it was to set up the line of, they don't have the books, but I know where we can find them. I think it was just the wrong way to set this up.
You could just say that. Like why does it have to be the white man thing? Like, I don't understand that one.
Yeah.
At that point, but that's a different podcast and a different story. So it does set up for them to go into, I think where we end up going next, actually, I believe, like into.
So we go to immediately into Dr. Z's office, and at this point I'm like, John still hasn't said anything to Carlos or Mary or Lotta that he's seen this creature, which is just like, there's, Whatever. But
he's seeing red right now, man. He's got this PTSD.
To Dr. Z. He's screaming at him. He pins Dr. Z with his forearm up to his throat against the wall, and he's yelling at Dr. Z, who's the man in the horn mask, the one that Patches saw, and he says, the one that Patches saw, he saw before he died, and the one that I saw, and it cuts over to Carlos, and Carlos immediately has this like, oh shit, John's seen this character, and Dr. Z's like, he's like, basically, hey, monsters don't exist. There is no man in the horn mask. I don't know what you're talking about. That's just what Patches was complaining about. Yes, it's in my notes, but like,
he doesn't.
In your head. It's not real.
Yeah, he seems legit, but again, if you're covering yourself up or if you're helping in any way, you're not going to say anything. But we do know he was not there when the murders happened. He says, hey, he's complaining about this, but you're seeing things, and like now you're seeing the same thing. I don't know what to tell you. Like,
there's got to be some sort of pattern here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, as John storms out the room, I thought it was interesting. Carlos stays behind, apologizes for John's behavior, and literally looks at the doctor and says, I really enjoyed our session today. Thank you. The doctor says thank you, and Carlos leaves. But it was like a genuine, something that like Carlos was going out of his way to say thank you.
I don't think Carlos has told that story to anybody.
Yeah.
And he was doing that because he knew he had to create some form of distraction and give him a reason to leave. And it does seem like it's helped him. Like this therapy session has helped him.
So then he runs down, catches John. He asks him about the man in the mask, and John's like, yes, I saw him. And they get into a fight about whether or not Carlos is believing all this stupid doctor therapy crap. It's nonsense. And Carlos is like, when I get back from Nam, I've never really talked about that. I usually make jokes to cover everything up. But today I finally talked about that. And today, sharing what I went through, I felt better for the first time. He completely forgot about the case. He forgot what they were doing. And he was saying talking actually helped. And it's like he was letting John know, man, you need to, like, this works. You should talk about it in the group while we're here. And
he's
John
trying to
clearly is not having it.
No, this is not how John's going to deal with things. And I will say, this does play right into what we know about John's character from Supernatural. Is he's hard-headed, hard-nosed, gonna put everything on his shoulders and not talk about it. Like that's just his character. And then you also see some of that in Dean as his character grows throughout Supernatural, and Dean is very much Dean and Sam. The one thing that they are doing well in this is that Dean and Sam are both of their parents. They have some of the good and some of the bad, and they're a mixture of them. So you really start to see that now as how hard-nosed John is, how he takes everything on his shoulder, always wanting to help, always the first one to run into the fight, where Mary is tactical and and all these different things. So it's like, oh, okay, I see where they got that from. So it's nice to see that.
Now, Carlos decides they should split up and look for this masked man. I thought, well, that's not a good idea. I don't know why they're splitting up. And you see John freaking out. But from there, we cut right back to Mary's house, and Mary and Lotta are standing outside of Maggie's door. And the place you learn that Lotta said, I know we could find a book about this, is Maggie's room. And I thought, okay, that makes sense why they've been harping on this Maggie thing this whole episode, because here we are. So now the two of them are going to go into Maggie's room for the first time since she died. They walk in. Now, Andrew, you might have to break this scene down a little bit, because I'm going to admit I watched this like 3 times and I was not paying attention to anything they were saying, because all I was looking for was a picture of Maggie.
Yeah.
To see if she, that's all I focused on.
There was a lack of photographs in there, but again, you didn't easily get photographs at the time period we were at. Like,
but she did have a big poster of Donny Osmond, right? Is that yeah? And they laughed about how she worshipped him.
So yeah, really, they're just going through her stuff, and I actually have a problem with this scene here. Is like, we have this emotional thing. They pull this box, they see that, but like, how does Lotta know that the book they need is exactly under the bed, and she flips to the exact page that has the exact monster on it?
I like how she skips like 40 pages, but I don't want to dismiss the postcard before we jump into that.
Go ahead, go to the postcard.
So the postcards were the postcards were important. They go in and they find all these postcards that they thought maybe someone had sent to Maggie. They realized that Maggie had been writing postcards to herself from every hunt they ever went on, and on every postcard was 2 bad things and 1 good thing. And they think to themselves, this must be how she dealt with it. This is how she was able to handle everything and keep a sane mind. And then we get to the point you're talking about. Lotta immediately looks under the bed herself, finds the book.
Oh, here's the book that I don't know what we're looking for. She skips
like 70 pages towards the end, and then cuts back like 20 pages and goes right to the monster.
I've scoured every book in the Men of Letters places, and it's not there. But I know where we can find it, under her bed in this book at this page. I can flip directly to it. Like, come on, guys. Like, you're trying to fill a time frame here. Let's allow this arc to be a little bit better on how they come to this conclusion, and give me something like, oh, I remember when Maggie talked about this. We need to go to Maggie's room, and she had a book on mythological creatures. Let's look in there.
Now, what they come to find out is, as they are looking at this book and reading about this creature, now in the book, the picture is a very animal-like creature with a mask on. At least my opinion. You can see the spear has like a flame to it. Of course, this is a very old book. It's probably someone's just depiction of it. But they kind of get nervous that John and Carlos don't know what they're up against, because Mary says, we've never been up against anything like this. And Lotta says, what, that they're up against a god? And Mary's like, basically like, exactly.
Yeah, so the thing that you have to realize is that over the course of time, and we don't have this history in here because we haven't gotten there, gods have changed their appearance to be more like where they're at and what the belief is at that time.
Which makes sense.
So like, when this book was written, he probably did look like this monster. That probably was what people believed in or anything there. And we have found through Supernatural that gods are kind of in hiding. Like, they're not really out there anymore because so many people don't believe in gods anymore. Whereas back then they believed in them, and they were running things, and they were all over the place because people worshiped the gods. And in Supernatural, you start to learn that people don't worship gods like they did before. So they're not as like holy or royal or all of that, like held on this pedestal that you would expect. So having them look like a, monster god looking thing would not allow them to interact with the world today. So they kind of have to look like the people of the day expect them to look in order to be there. And they're also kind of hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we've learned from Supernatural about gods.
So
they actually run a hotel. It's kind of weird, but that happens.
So we cut back to the hospital, And we see Carlos walking alone down a hallway, and he starts to have a PTSD moment, very similar to what we saw Patches experience.
I was not happy with this.
He starts to hear the helicopter blades and goes into, and all of a sudden this caution tape falls down from a door, and Carlos turns around, gets up because he's sitting down in the hallway because he's kind of panicking, he's freaking out, and he looks into this door, and next thing you know, he gets like sucked into the door.
Yeah,
very Stranger Things like. Or very like Emperor Palpatine pulling him to him or something.
Yeah.
That kind of made me laugh a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where, you got to tell the story arc pretty fast. So he happens to kneel down next to this exact place. But then you also go back to like how Patches was. It's almost like it was luring him with the sounds to this area.
Yeah.
And that I think that was where Patches was killed. That's why the caution tape is up, or where Jimmy was just killed.
Jimmy was just killed. Yeah.
Caution tape there. So it's luring them to this exact spot.
So now we've got John alone in the hospital. It cuts to him, and he's clearly looking in all the different doors and rooms and trying to understand. And he eventually comes to the door where Carlos just got sucked in. And as he opens the door, sees psych unit on it, we see him just walking into a room, and it's kind of confusing. But as the camera pans around, it's essentially Vietnam. He's walking into the jungle. And as he starts to walk in there, it cuts over to Mary, Lotta, and John's mom. They're driving to get to the hospital. His mom's kind of confused why she's even there. And they're like, hey, the hospital only allows family visitations. We need you to get us in there because your son is up against a god because we suck and we put him in a bad situation, him and Carlos, so we need your help. And she's like, but then Mary says something along the lines of, he's a soldier boy. He'll be able to hold his own. And Millie, John's mom, says, since he was 5 years old, John's the type of person that if he sees a fight, even if he can't win it, he's going to run head on to it.
So when you're not a good thing when you're fighting a god. Like you kind of want to know how to kill it before you start the fight.
Yeah.
Or how to weaken it. And I think that's, that is historically a difficult thing to do is you don't really kill gods.
Correct, yeah.
You trap them or you outwit them or you do something there. You don't really kill a god.
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting because Nato, as Lotta referred to multiple times, correcting John's mom, who's clearly upset at Mary and Lotta right now because she's like, so you sent my son to face a god who's immortal. Good job. Like, it was like kind of that mother moment of like, I could toss you out of this car right now, you dumb bitch. But Lotta and Mary kind of say, hey, there is we know how to defeat him. Basically, he has a totem, because of course he does. He's a god, so he's going to have some sort of totem. And they learn that the totem needs to be near them if they're going to take a human form of some sort. And so that totem has to be around the hospital, likely. So they need to go find this totem, and if they can destroy the totem, the god can be killed. And we learn that his totem is a vase.
Yeah, so the one thing also here, there's a lot of gods of war. And just so we know, and I don't think they go into it, Neto is the Celtic god of war. So it's a Celtic character, which gives you kind of like the spear, and then the outfit kind of fits, but it was kind of funny because it's the outfit, I say fits, but I don't think the outfit fits at all for a Celtic god because it looked like a Roman god, like
Correct.
Almost at that point. So I'm like, this was where I was kind of, because I looked it up. I was like, okay, what god is this? Because we've had other gods of war before, and I've never heard of this one. So, okay, it's the Celtic god. And then I kind of looked it up, and yeah, wardrobe not doing very well on these right now. Like, not the depiction that you would think you would get for a Celtic god.
Mm-hmm.
So not happy about that.
We cut back to the jungle, and John is kind of looking around, looking for Carlos, and they run into each other. Now we come into this scene where it's a little foreshadowing from the conversation that John's mom had just laid out on the type of person John is. Carlos says, yeah, I'm trapped in here. Every time I think I've found the exit, I get turned around. I'm going the wrong way. And John says, okay, we need to find the exit. But then Carlos points out, okay, it's kind of like something is trapping us in here until we face it. And I almost thought Carlos was alluding to the fact that they need to face their trauma and their PTSD and be willing to deal with it. And John immediately turns around and says, or you mean something that's in here that we need to face? So John immediately is like, no, there's just something keeping us in here. That thing is keeping us in here. That masked person is keeping us in here, and we got to go kill it to get out. And as John starts to go head on into it, just like his mom said that he would, Carlos tries to stop him. And as Carlos reaches for him and takes a step towards John as he's walked away, Carlos steps on a what, Ender?
He steps on a landmine.
And we get full circle with John's story at this point.
Yeah, so it kind of comes all the way back around, and we started with something and we ended here, and I was it was very predictable, and I kind of like I'm accepting it for the first couple of episodes. But they really need to start stepping up their game on not making these things so damn predictable of what's going to happen, because that's not how Supernatural is. A lot of times they throw curveballs at them, and what you think is real isn't really what's happening, and they have to figure it out on the fly. Whereas here it's like, oh, we sent them in and it's not what we think. Now we know exactly what we need to do because we found the book in this exactly perfect spot. Like, okay. This is almost too planned out, too coordinated. This is not how this should be.
Yeah. So John's trying to get...
I think we also have to remember this is a story being told by Dean.
Correct, yeah.
So it's still very like storyteller-ish.
Yeah. So as John is trying to calm Carlos down, telling him it's going to be okay, you can see the panic in John's face, like he's reliving this nightmare again. And as they're in this discussion, the masked man shows up. The god shows up. And as John turns around and Carlos looks, we come to find out he takes the mask off, and it is Jimmy.
Yep.
So the entire time was Jimmy, and John kind of gets an argument with him, and he says, this whole thing was theater. You were just acting this out. And Jimmy says, well, I was acting it out because I wanted you to embrace your anger because I need you. And John starts to get super confused, but he's still angry at the same time. And essentially, Jimmy goes on to explain, and I think this part of the episode, to me, it's very underlined because I thought there would be more to it at the end of the episode when John and the gang get back together, but they don't talk about it. That confused me a little bit. But Jimmy goes on to say, I need to make sure you're ready because you and your hunter friends are weak, but you, a hunter and a soldier, you could defeat them. And John's like, what are you talking about? Like this, like John's still kind of under the impression this is just an isolated thing. This guy just does what he does. And he's feeding off this. And he says, I need to make sure you're ready to fight the Akrita.
Yeah.
So it makes me feel like immediately there, I was like, that's why he's targeting all the veterans, because he's trying to find a soldier to fight the Akrita.
Yeah. So I agree with you here. I think they needed to dive into this more, and maybe the next episode, like the beginning of the next episode, we'll have like a discussion or something here, because again, you're getting right into the beginning of Supernatural is really, you're just hunting monsters. Like everything is new and we're trying to find our dad. So like the original name of this show was Dad's on a Hunting Trip. Like I want to find our dad on a hunting trip, and we're going through, he left a journal, so we're following all the things through his journal, and we're going to find him. This show is actually getting into like deep stuff, like the end of the world situation, the end of all things. Because when we talked about the Akrita earlier, it wasn't just like it's going to destroy people. It's going to go after demons. It's going to go after all the stuff. Like it's going to go after gods now. Like we're learning that the Akrita is this devastating force. Now there was a force in Supernatural that they called the Darkness. That was just coming for everybody. And it's actually God's sister. So like through all of this stuff, the Darkness is just going to destroy things, where the gods were really worried. It's like, we have all these different levels of things, but there are things beyond us that we have to worry about. So having him trying to find a soldier that can fight the Akrita makes sense. Like, okay, the gods are worried about this now. We really, really need to be worried about this because this is a god.
So John and Jimmy,
But
the
they don't
god
know this
here,
yet because they're not experienced hunters. They don't know these things.
So John makes a deal with Jimmy that if Jimmy says, if you fight me and draw first blood, your friend will go free, so Carlos will be free, and you'll join me. And like, it's almost like this Darth Vader moment. Join me, and together we will rule the world. But this god wants John to join him so they can go fight the Akrita together.
Yeah,
that's really all this god is trying to do.
Yeah, and that's the part where again you nailed it there. Like, we really don't dive into this. Like, we don't sit back and think of like, maybe we should have a little bit more of a conversation here. Not that this god's going to have that conversation with you, but if a god is this worried, I should probably be a little bit worried too.
Yeah, maybe John could have been like, hey, we've been tracking the Akrita. We got this box that will trap them. It doesn't work right now. Maybe we should have maybe we should team up.
I think where this episode misses a little bit too is I don't think they portray how much the PTSD is affecting John right now. He's not thinking clearly.
Correct.
He is seeing red. He's wanting to fight. This is the fight. Like, I can just, and we know from the earlier scene, violence is something that calms John down. When he was punching the paper towel dispenser, he calmed down. So he's trying to find this fight. And his mom even says he's always going to run into a fight. So does the anger and the fight calm him down? Like, of all this anger he's been balling up with his dad leaving and everything that he's been dealing with, fighting and anger seems to be the thing that calms John.
Yeah.
So he's not seeing clearly.
Not at all. Now the scene ends with the scene ends with John getting a spear in his hands, and we cut back to the hospital where Mary, John's mom, and Lotta are walking in. They go up to Dr. Z. And Millie basically says, I want to check my son out. I'm his mother. Let him out. Dr. Z says, well, there's an emergency right now, so the psych unit is on lockdown. And I thought it was funny because this is another place CW gets the details so good. She goes, well, unless you want the whole world to hear and you want to explain yourself to Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite, yeah.
So eventually that nurse from earlier comes over, tells the doctor that Jimmy's body has disappeared. And Dr. C's like, well, did just get up and walk away. What do you mean it disappeared?
So,
of course, we know Jimmy's the god.
Solidifies that he has no idea what's going on.
Correct. Yeah. So the doctor has no idea, and he looks at the ladies and he says, "Help, do whatever you want. Like, I gotta get. I can't
figure out where this body went."
Yeah.
I think and I was gonna be really upset because it was almost like that social media point of like, I'm gonna tell the world about this, and I was gonna be like, really? How are you gonna do that? How are you gonna do that, Millie? It's the 70s, and then she said Walter Cronkite. I was like, oh, okay, good job.
Yeah,
good job, CW. Good job. You shut me down right away on how you're gonna get this out there. We're gonna get you on the nightly news or the nightly national news.
The nightly national news.
Yeah.
So as the girls are going up the stairs to find the psych ward, they are talking about that they've got to go find this vase. We cut back to this is where it gets into the episode that they all do, where they go back and forth from scene to scene really quickly. Mm-hmm. John is now, while Carlos is watching, John is now fighting the god one-on-one, and the god's almost toying with him a little bit. I mean, John is just getting his ass kicked. And I was like, well, here's the bookended part with Mary, because here's this one-on-one fight with the monster that she was talking about when they were sparring. So
yeah, it's, and you're going to see that throughout probably 90% of the episodes.
Yeah. I mean, he even says at one point, you're still holding back, which is word for word what Mary said at the beginning. Don't hold back. It cuts back to the ladies, and they're searching all over this room for this totem. They don't know if they can find it. I don't know what made them immediately go into this one particular room.
I think when they heard like
Jimmy's
body
disappearing.
is
We're just supposed
disappearing.
to.
Like, let's go to Jimmy's room. Like,
Okay.
if a dead body disappears, let's go to Jimmy's room. Like, that's that's in our alley of where we should start. Yeah, I'll give you that one. But again, they don't define it. They just kind of show up in this place, and Mary happens to look down and if you're a god and you're hiding your most prized possession, you think you would fix the ceiling tile.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna say the ceiling tile's like wide open here, and again, I'm like, this is just too easy.
Yeah,
like it's never this easy. It can't be this easy.
No, I think it's funny as they're clearly about to climb up on this wardrobe and pull down this. We already know, we can assume that the vase is going to be up in the ceiling, which it is. They're cutting back to John, and he is fighting this god still. And he says, "Your scars are holding your back. Let me wipe the slate clean." And I thought it was interesting because he takes this flaming spear and he holds it against John's elbow where the scar is, and all of his wounds start healing.
Yeah.
Immediately. Now, while this is going on, my first thought was, wow, they really don't want to keep doing the makeup on that scar, do they, after this episode?
I mean, he's always wearing long sleeves anyway, so it's like they just cover it up.
Yeah. So
continuity is not a thing for the CW.
They cut back to the ladies, and they're admiring this vase as they look at it. Lana's like, the details are exquisite. We cut back to John and the god, and he says, "On your feet, soldier. This one belongs to you. Claim it." And he's basically saying, take the helmet, take the other helmet, and join me. And it was just very much like Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker moment for me. And then it cuts back to the ladies again. This is all really quickly, and Lana's like, ironic, isn't it, that this god who needs all this, how the detail in this vase, and the whole time I'm like, John's literally fighting for his life right now, and you're over there. This is the thing you're supposed to be destroying. You would have thought Mary would have taken it out of the ceiling and immediately just thrown it on the ground.
No. That is again, they're homaging to classic Supernatural of like how many times Sam and Dean would be fighting a thing, and one of them would be taking like overly long to do something. Like opening a book to the right page to read some kind of demonic passage they need, or getting a salt, shell put into a gun so they could shoot a ghost. Like there's always this like, are you gonna do it? Like, are you gonna do it? Like, hurry up! There's a fight going on. Like, do something now, please.
So John's mom smashes the vase out of Lana's hand.
Here's where I actually didn't really like that, but like, okay, they smash it. Yeah, we move forward. But one thing I didn't like here was I kind of never felt John was in super danger. I felt like Carlos
I don't think
was.
you can ever gonna feel like he's in super danger, right? If you already know he lives to a certain point. It's the problem with prequels.
No. So there's, dead is not dead when you're a Winchester.
But he's still gonna come back.
Sure, but you don't know how or when or what. I mean, that's like, you do know he makes it to a certain point, but I felt like this fight was not to, it was to test John, and if John failed, Carlos died. Like, I never felt like John was the one in super danger here.
Okay, gotcha.
It's just my opinion. Like, I felt like this god found the one he was looking for.
Yeah, which clearly, because he killed everyone else so easily, and he's obviously letting John fight a little bit. But as it cuts back to, I'm just going to keep calling him Jimmy because I can't remember the name of the god already.
Edo?
Atto.
It's N-E-T-O.
Etto. All of a sudden, he can't use a spear. You can see it change. He changes. He does this jiggle just to give us a visual reference that the totem has been killed. And I would assume as a god, he knows his totem has been killed. But now he can't stab something 3 inches away from his blade. He just keeps trying to stab John, but he keeps missing. And eventually John gets up, steals the spear, breaks it in half, and then instead of
stabs
using
him with the wrong end. It's so dumb. It's almost like they
spear that he breaks in half, and I'm like, okay, he's gonna get a little fight. No, there's no fight at all. He immediately just stabs him in the chest through his armor with the wooden end that's broken half.
I almost feel like
they messed up and they just didn't go back and fix it.
CW was like, okay, we only have one set of blood capsules left, and he did it the wrong way, and they're like, all right, we just got to take this shot. Like, we're not going to go back to it. It is purely a continuity issue or an editing issue where they took the wrong one or something. Like, it really bothers me that he didn't stab him with the end of the sword.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the thing. Like, since that spear is not godly anymore, he can't stab anything with it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe that's it. But
so then,
I was just like, because I watched that twice. I'm like, wait a minute, did I just see that?
Yeah.
I'm like, he stabbed him with the blunt. Like, that wouldn't even go through. Like, is John's got super strength now? Like, how did he stab him with this weird blunt end thing and have blood splatter everywhere? It was just,
yeah. And here's where I have a problem with the props and the costume, because the god here is clearly, it's almost like he's happy. Like, he found the one. John is the chosen one in this god's eyes. So he's dying. He is going to die. And he's almost happy. And he tells John, you're just like me. Now, John does not take that very well. He I'm nothing like you. And he picks up this helmet and does his best Daemon Targaryen impression from House of Dragon.
That's exactly what I thought it was.
And just brutally beats this guy in the face with his own helmet. And the whole time, all I could think, yes, it was very hard because this is clearly stemming from the PTSD side. But when I stopped thinking about the episode itself and I was just watching the scene, the armor that he was wearing was so plastic, looked like it came out of the dollar store. And the spear was so plasticky, it was wobbling around. And I was like, it
was bad. Like I've never... I don't know what happened with that. Like this whole one from the beginning did not have good wardrobe at all. Like they missed that one on this character, on this god, because it doesn't even make you feel godly.
No,
and there are tiers of gods, but they didn't even go into that. Like, if they had told me like this was a lower tier god, yeah, he wasn't. He's not one of the top tier ones that are out there. Like, okay, maybe he doesn't have the greatest armor, but like, give him some brass armor. Like, don't make it look plastic. Like, come on, CW, you got money now.
Yeah,
like this money. This show's doing fantastic. It's your number one show out there right now. Like, it's not like you're skimping here. And I was kind of upset because it's like it's Jensen Ackles. Like you went through this with Supernatural and you're going to let this go through?
Yeah.
Like, you're the producer here. Like, I was a little upset with that.
Now, we see Carlos come out of the woods and he's super excited. He's like, hey, I don't know what you did, but the mine's gone. And Carlos is all smiling. And then he realizes that the god is dead. He's got a spear the wrong way through his chest. And John is standing over top of him, just drenched in blood. And Carlos kind of looks concerned. And as they look concerned, Jimmy disappears, the jungle disappears, and they're standing inside the psych unit.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of is what it is. I think there's I didn't like the ending here. I didn't. I think there was a lot of better ways to do this. Better fights there, because they leave so much to like question that I don't really know if what happened was a good thing or a bad thing. And maybe that's what I'm not supposed to know, that, because I almost feel like we haven't even gone into the fact that this guy said the Accreta were coming, and we're not talking about
this is
that.
where
like,
it gets,
nothing's happened.
At the end of the episode here, I get really frustrated, just like I was frustrated that John didn't say anything to Mary, that he had seen this masked figure, but I guess you can chalk it up to the PTSD and his anger issues that he's seeing red. But they come out of the hospital, John's mom's there, and he's like, what are you doing here? And she's like, what does it look like? Saving your ear. And it cuts over to Mary and Lotta. They ask Carlos what happened. Carlos explains how the god turned this room into the jungle, and it was all there. And I'm going to say this word for word because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. And he says, he said the only way out was for John to fight him. And they're like, just John? ? Why? And all Carlos says is, I guess he just saw something in John, but he was wrong. John won. And that was the end of it. And then the Dr. Z comes up and says, hey, Carlos, listen, I hope we didn't scare you off. The hospital's handing all of these patient deaths, yada, yada, yada. It's a lot to be desired. And he was basically reassuring Carlos that, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure veterans are taken care of. And if you would like to come back, we're here for you. In the middle of this, Mary realizes that, okay, this doctor's for real and this is a weird situation. So she hands the doctor, and this is where you could see this recurring character, she hands the doctor Kyle Reed's business card and says, hey, you should reach out to him for help to help you launch this and get this done the right way. And Carlos does acknowledge that he thinks he has a new therapist now.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm not happy with, and I probably need to go back and watch some of the episodes because I might get this wrong, but we don't really know this god is dead. We know John beat him, and then they disappear. But a lot of times when gods die in these episodes, something like big flashes of light, like you just killed a god. Like something grand happens when the god goes down.
I will say this. If he comes back, I'll be very upset with this because they put so much emphasis on the totem, which is a big deal when you're talking about gods.
But again,
and if they destroy the totem...
It doesn't necessarily mean, like, it could be a test. Like, he wanted you to find this. He allowed this to happen. The god set this up to see if this group was good enough to fight the Akrita.
Okay.
Like, this is a test that we have. But I'm just saying, like, normally when you kill a god, something big happens. Like, there's a catastrophic shift. And energy is released or something happens. But this was just kind of like, we stabbed this god and it disappeared.
Okay, now listen. Then if you're given the CW an out to bring this god back, then I'm going to tell you this: if the god comes back, it's because he's the leader, this epic leader to this charge of the Akrita, and he's recruited these people, and he's the all being that's building this army to fight the Akrita.
I'm gonna give you something that only.
I'm just saying, if that's the case, there was nothing epic about this guy. This guy came out of the Dollar General.
Hold on,
I don't want him to lead nothing.
Anybody that doesn't
let him lead a trick-or-treat platoon.
Anyone that doesn't want any spoilers, go ahead and stop this now. Move forward 5 or 10 minutes maybe. But I'm going to tell you what I actually believe they're setting this up for. There's a character in Supernatural called the Trickster. The Trickster does things like this all the time, where he creates these environments. He creates these gods that aren't real to test people, to trick them, to do that. That god, the Trickster, is actually an angel called Gabriel. It's a Gabriel angel that is there. So in my mind, I think we might be setting up to have Gabriel here because it felt like the Trickster. Because when you defeat things in the Trickster's world, it just disappears. Gotcha. Like this was very Tricksters here. And you wouldn't know that unless you've seen Supernatural. But the Trickster is at some point, Gabriel started impersonating the Trickster. So we know at this time, the Trickster and Gabriel are both out there. So it could have been a Trickster, and it could have been Gabriel being the Trickster, trying to find people to help him fight this war that's coming up, because that's what Gabriel does. Because Gabriel is the protector of all of heaven's weapons. So he's going to give you weapons that could fight these things, but he doesn't want to get involved himself. He doesn't want to be there. So it felt very Tricksterish because of how it just disappeared. So that's my theory from having watched the other episodes.
That makes sense.
Or I 100% agree with you. There's nothing epic here. They missed it completely. Please don't bring him back. Yeah, I agree with that too. But again, as a Supernatural fan, I felt Trickster at the end of this. Very much.
Now, I do want to point out the last couple things that happened at the end here. Mary offers Carlos a place to stay at her house. Offers up Maggie's room. Carlos is confused. She basically admits that, hey, we can't keep this room closed forever. We need to move on. And giving it to a friend is going to be a good way to start that. They make a joke about the Donny Osmond posters. Carlos is super excited about it because he doesn't want to sleep in his van. And then we have a little montage as it cuts through. You see Mary cleaning out Maggie's room. You see Carlos in another therapy session with Dr. Z. He looks over at the empty seat, and you can see he's kind of sad that John's not there with him. And then we have Lotta comes up to the porch of Mary, hands Mary a postcard, and they start writing down. So you got to imagine they're going to follow Maggie's footsteps here with the whole postcard situation. We quickly cut back to the Winchester garage. John's mom is setting up some Chinese food for dinner for two. And as, of course, epic music is playing again from the time period, which I love about this show so far.
Yep.
And it's Everybody's Talking at Me, I believe is the name of the song.
Everybody's Talking to Me, yep.
And John's mom realizes John's not there. She's like, where is he? She finds him in the bathroom, and he is fully clothed, kneeling down in the bathtub with the shower just running over top of him. And I thought it was perfect. Right at this moment when she sees him, when she sees him in the song that's being used, it gets to the part where it says, "Only the echoes of my mind," is the lyrics that's going on in the song. They do such a good job relating the music and the words of the music to certain scenes. Yeah. I think they do fantastic. I don't know if that's how it was in Supernatural as well, but they're doing it
very much. Yeah.
And you can see John's mom just looks completely just distraught, like, but she does all she can. She gets in the bathtub with him, wraps her arms around him, and just kind of hugs him from behind. And that is how the episode ends.
Yeah, so I think this is important here, and I hope not many people miss this, but what I got from it was, here is Carlos finding a way to deal with his inner demons. He's at therapy. Here's Mary and Lotta finding a way to deal with all of the things that are happening in the postcards and things like that, trying to deal with what's going on. And then here's John, not able to deal with any of it. He's still breaking down. He hasn't found a way to deal with what's going on, and that's very much the character in Supernatural of his dad. Like, he just cannot find a way to move on past these traumatic things that happen. So we're building that character up to really be this bottle of anger and just a wrecking force. Which is very different than Supernatural itself, but very John here. Like, I could see John's dad being stuck like this and just being that tormented by his past and not being able to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a long one, man. We got into it.
I mean, we had to catch up on some of the things I missed and get your opinion on what you think.
Well, I think whenever you're dealing with one of these episodes that deals with a very traumatic thing such as PTSD, and I want to, kind of go into the public service announcement. I just recently lost my mother, so I can feel for anyone that's going through trauma, and you feel very alone. So if anybody's listening to this, please make sure there's a lot of resources that you have out there. There's a lot of places that can help you with PTSD or any other trauma that you're dealing with. Go talk to somebody about it. Like, you can't get through this alone. So, I know anyone listening here, hell, message us. Jump in our Discord, talk to us.
Funny enough,
please reach out.
My wife is a therapist, and she specializes in trauma therapy. So,
yeah. So please reach out to us. This is a very serious topic. I know we talk about this, we kid, we joke, we go through it, but we all know somebody that's dealing with something crazy that won't talk to us, that won't express it or anything there. Again, as funny as it may sound, but reach out to us. We're here. Please reach out to your loved ones, and if not, there's plenty of resources out there for you to get help, and you're not in it alone. You need to talk to somebody.
Absolutely. And we'll put a couple links in the description as well for some places to reach out as well if you need.
Yeah, absolutely. When we have television shows that get into these types of topics, I just always want to bring up, you have resources, use them. And if you can't, you feel like you can't, we're here. We'll listen.
I do want to say, I think the episode did kind of an underlying good job on showing how it was helping Carlos.
Yes.
I think that, that subtle addition to it was a nice little touch to the episode.
Absolutely. And everyone's going to find their own way to deal with it, and you're not in it alone. All right. And on that note, that was episode 4 of the Winchesters. It was a good one. I can't wait to see what we get in episode 5. James taking the lead. I love it. I love it when James takes the lead on these things.
Awful.
I normally have to do it, but we got through it today. So thank you everybody for listening. Have a great night. We're out.